My daughter placed her coffee mug upside down on the Thanksgiving table at 10:30 in the morning. Just set it there, right next to the cranberry dish, handle pointing toward me. No one else noticed. No one else was meant to. That upside-down mug was a signal we'd invented together 17 years ago, when she was 11 years old and I was still working fraud investigations for the county sheriff's department. It meant, "Mom, something is wrong. I can't say it here, but I need you." I looked at her across the table. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that lives only on the surface, the kind I'd spent 22 years learning to read in interview rooms. Then she turned to the man sitting beside her and laughed at something he said, bright and easy, like nothing in the world was the matter. I picked up my fork and kept eating. But something old and quiet had already switched on inside me. My name is Sandra Callahan. I'm 52 years old. I retired early from law enforcement after 28 years, the last 2 decades working financial crimes and fraud investigations. My husband Paul passed away 3 years ago from a heart attack that came without any warning, the way the worst things always do. My daughter, Emily, is 26. She has a master's degree in data analytics, works for a healthcare tech company in Denver, and has her father's stubbornness and my instincts, which means she is almost impossible to fool and almost impossible to ask for help. For most of her life, she called me every Sunday, not because I asked her to, just because that's who she was. 8 months ago, the calls started getting shorter. Then the gaps between them stretched. Then texts replaced the calls entirely. I didn't push. Paul always said I had a habit of turning everything into a case file, cataloging, cross-referencing, looking for the thread that didn't belong. I was trying after his death to just be her mother, not an investigator, not a woman still reflexively scanning every room for the thing that was out of place. So when Emily called in September to tell me she was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving, I told her I was thrilled. She sounded lighter than she had in months. I held on to that. His name was Hale. He was 38, originally from Charlotte. He worked, he said, as a private equity strategist for a boutique investment group called Vantage Meridian Partners. Emily had met him at an industry conference in Denver in February. By May, he had moved into her apartment. 3 months. I told myself that was just the way things were now. He arrived with Emily the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the two of them pulling into my driveway in her car. I watched from the front window. He had a hand on the small of her back constantly, not possessively, but always there, always maintaining contact. I noticed it the way I notice everything, automatically, before I can decide whether noticing means something. When he shook my hand at the door, he held eye contact a beat longer than necessary and said, "Sandra, I have heard so much about you. Emily says you're the smartest person she knows." He said it warmly, convincingly. The words landed exactly the way they were intended to. I liked him immediately. That bothered me more than anything else. Dinner that first night was easy in a way that felt almost too easy. Marcus was charming. He asked thoughtful questions about my career, seemed genuinely curious about fraud investigation, told self-deprecating stories that made Emily laugh. He cleared the table before I thought to ask, and waved off my help in the kitchen afterward. That night, lying in bed, I thought, maybe this is just a man my daughter loves. Maybe he's exactly what he appears to be. I almost let myself believe it. Thanksgiving morning, my sister Carol arrived at 9 with her husband and their kids. My brother Jim came at 11. The house filled up the way it used to, the way it hadn't since Paul died. Marcus was already in the kitchen helping Carol with the pie crust before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. He knew how to make Paul's sweet potato casserole. Emily had texted him the recipe. Carol pulled me aside near the living room and said quietly, "I like him, Sandra. He's good people." I nodded and said nothing. At 10:30, Emily came into the kitchen to refill her coffee. She reached past me for the pot, set her mug on the table to pour, and placed it upside down. 1 second. Then she flipped it right side up, filled it, and walked back into the living room. I stood there with my fork halfway to my plate. Nobody else saw it. After the meal, while Carol and Jim were watching football and Marcus was laughing with the kids about something in the living room, I found Emily in the garage, pretending to look for a folding chair we hadn't needed in years. I closed the door behind me. She turned around. The smile was completely gone. How long? I said. She exhaled, slow, controlled, the way she exhales when she's been holding something for too long. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. For 2 months. I leaned against the old workbench, the one Paul had built the year Emily was born, where the two of us used to fix her bike and build model rockets on Saturday afternoons. Tell me everything, I said. Start from the beginning. She sat down on an overturned crate and pressed both hands against her knees. He started talking about Vantage Meridian around July, she said. Casually at first, mentioning a fund that was doing well, a client who'd seen strong returns. I didn't think much of it. He works in private equity. It made sense. When did it stop being casual? August. He sat me down and said he wanted to be upfront with me because he felt like we were getting serious, and he didn't want money to be a source of tension between us. She paused. He said Vantage Meridian had a new private offering launching, only available to people inside the firm and their close contacts. He said he wanted me to have access to it because he loved me, because he wanted us to build something together. I knew the script. I had read variations of it in case files for 20 years. What's the minimum investment? I asked. $50,000 to start. But he made it sound like the entry point was almost modest. He said some of his clients were putting in $400,000. Has he shown you documentation? A prospectus. It looked real, Mom. Proper formatting, SEC registration numbers, everything. I looked up Vantage Meridian online. There's a professional website. Client testimonials. LinkedIn profiles with years of history. Emily. She looked at me. How much of your savings have you already moved? A silence that lasted just long enough to break my heart a little. He hasn't asked me to move anything yet, she said. He keeps saying he doesn't want to pressure me. He wants me to feel completely ready. She looked at her hands. But 3 weeks ago, he mentioned that the fund's entry window closes January 15th. After that, he said it won't be available for at least another 3 years. Artificial urgency. Classic. Your 401k. I said. Has he mentioned it? She looked up at me sharply. How did you know? Because that's where the real money is for someone your age. The savings account is the conversation opener. The retirement account is the target. I kept my voice even. Has he? She nodded slowly. He didn't say it directly. He said if I really wanted to maximize the opportunity, I should think about whether I had assets I wasn't actively growing. She paused. He left the door open. And that's when you knew. She looked at the concrete floor. I work in data analytics, Mom. I understand statistical manipulation. I understand how people engineer trust. Her voice dropped. I kept telling myself it wasn't the same thing, that he was different, that I was pattern matching because of you, because of how I grew up around your work. She stopped. And then I started wondering if I was telling myself that because I didn't want it to be true. I walked over and sat down beside her on a second crate. You placed the mug upside down, I said. You already knew. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I spent the rest of that Thanksgiving being the most pleasant version of myself I'd been in years. I laughed at Marcus's stories. I complimented his patience with Carol's kids. I told old case stories over dessert that had everyone at the table leaning in. He was good, I'll say that plainly. He had a warmth that felt completely authentic. The kind of warmth that makes you feel chosen. That makes you feel seen in the specific way you most want to be seen. I recognized it for what it was, not because it contained nothing real, but because I understood now what it was built to accomplish. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my old laptop and worked until nearly 2 a.m. Vantage Meridian Partners had a polished website, a listed address in Denver, and a history of 3 years online. What it did not have was a registration in the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database that matched its stated assets under management. The numbers didn't line up. I searched Marcus Hale across social platforms. The LinkedIn profile had been created 16 months ago. I found a civil case filing in Denver District Court, 2020, plaintiff a retired engineer named William Cho, accusing a Marcus Hargrove of defrauding him through a fraudulent investment vehicle. The photograph attached to the court document was several years old. But the jawline, the eyes, the particular angle of the chin, they were the same. The case had been settled out of court and partially sealed. William Cho had lost $94,000. I wrote down everything. Then I texted a former colleague named Rita, who still ran financial crimes investigations for the county. Need to talk. Not tonight, but soon. She replied at 6 a.m. My office Monday. I wrote back. I'll come to you. The Friday after Thanksgiving, I took Emily to the farmer's market, the same one we'd gone to every fall when she was growing up. Marcus called it sweet. He waved us off from the front step. On the drive over, I told her everything I'd found. I showed her the screenshots. I told her about William Cho and the Denver case. I told her about the LinkedIn account that was 16 months old. She was quiet for a long time. He told me he'd been harassed by a former business partner, she said finally. That the man had spread false information online. He said he deliberately kept a low profile because of it. That's called inoculation, I said. He gives you the explanation before you find the problem. So when you find it, you already have his answer in your head. She stared at the road ahead. I let the silence sit. I loved him, she said. Past tense. She'd already moved it there herself. I know, I said. How do we do this? Carefully, I said. And not alone. Monday morning, I was in Rita's office by 9. I laid out everything. The Vantage Meridian discrepancies, the Denver filing, the mismatched SEC registration, the LinkedIn timeline. Rita was not a woman who got excited easily. But I watched her lean forward in her chair as I walked her through it. The Denver case, she said. I can pull the sealed details through interagency. If he's running the same scheme across state lines, we're in federal territory. He's targeting my daughter, I said. I need this done right. How much has he asked for so far? Nothing yet. She's still in the grooming phase. The deadline he gave her is January 15th. Rita picked up her pen. That gives us time. Not a lot. She looked at me. Is Emily willing to cooperate? She's the one who told me, I said. Then let's build a case. Over the next 3 weeks, Emily played the role she had to play. She didn't pull back from Marcus. That would have triggered him. Instead, she stayed warm, stayed curious, asked thoughtful questions about the fund as though she was genuinely considering it. She let him believe she was moving toward yes. Meanwhile, she documented everything. Every text, every email, every conversation where he mentioned the fund or the deadline or the minimum investment. He sent her a private offering document, 12 pages of professionally formatted paperwork with Vantage Meridian's logo across the top, and buried on page 10, wire transfer instructions to an account registered in the Cayman Islands. Rita's team found 3 other victims in Colorado and 1 in New Mexico who had wired money to the same account. One of them, a 59-year-old widow named Patricia Reeves, had transferred $275,000 before the fund went silent and Marcus stopped returning her calls. She'd been told the assets were frozen pending a regulatory review. She'd been waiting 8 months. The name attached to the wire transfer account traced back to a Marcus Harlow. Different last name. Same face. Investigators confirmed at least 3 identities across 4 states. The second week of December, Marcus sat down with Emily at her kitchen table and told her he needed to talk about the deadline.
He was gentle about it.
He said he'd been thinking about their future, about what he wanted for them, and he wanted to make sure she had every opportunity she deserved. He slid the wire transfer instructions across the table. Emily looked at them for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something first?" He smiled. "Of course." "I looked up William Cho," she said. "From Denver. 2020. The smile didn't disappear. That was the part she told me about later that impressed her most. He didn't flinch. He held the expression for exactly 1 beat too long, tilted his head slightly, and said, "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I think you do," Emily said. He reached for the documents. She put her hand flat on top of them. "My mother sends her regards," she said. "She says she recognizes the method." 2 investigators from Rita's task force were parked outside. They came through the door 60 seconds after Emily sent the text. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He stood up from the table, straightened his jacket, and looked at Emily with an expression she described to me later as almost impossible to read, something that might have been genuine regret, or might have been the closing beat of a performance he'd been rehearsing for a very long time. "You're more like your mother than I expected," he said. Emily looked at him steadily. "I learned from her," she said. The investigation that followed took 4 months. The full picture was worse than Rita had initially estimated. Marcus Harlow, his legal name, as best as investigators could confirm, had been running variations of the same scheme for at least 11 years across 7 states. He targeted women between 35 and 55, typically recently widowed or newly divorced, typically with significant savings or retirement assets. He spent 3 to 6 months building what felt, to the people inside it, like something genuinely real, before introducing the investment opportunity. The thing that stayed with me most, reading the case reports, was how many of the victims had known something was slightly wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Just slightly. Persistently. A detail that didn't quite fit. A story that didn't quite square. A moment where the warmth felt almost too precisely calibrated to what they needed to hear. Most of them had talked themselves out of it. Most of them had blamed themselves for the suspicion. Patricia Reeves recovered $140,000 of her money through asset seizure proceedings. The rest was gone. She testified at the federal hearing, and her voice broke only once, near the end, when she described believing that Marcus was going to be her second chance at not being alone. That part stayed with me longest. Emily called me on a Sunday in April. It was the first call in months that felt entirely like itself again. No careful pauses, no weight beneath the surface. "How are you doing?" I asked. "I'm good," she said, and she sounded it. Better than I'd expected, honestly. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular. A show she'd started watching. Whether I was ever going to repaint the back hallway. A documentary we'd both watched independently and had almost identical complaints about. Near the end, she said, "Mom, the mug thing." I waited. "I wasn't even sure you'd remember it after all these years." "I remembered it," I said. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't figure out how to say it with him sitting right there. "You didn't have to say it," I said. That was the whole point. A pause. "She made me feel like I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for," Emily said. "That's the part that's hardest to explain. It wasn't just about the money. It was that he was good at making you feel chosen. Like he'd seen you specifically, the real you, and decided you were worth choosing. That's what makes it work," I said. "And that's what makes it so hard to see. It doesn't come at you like a threat. It comes at you like a gift." She was quiet for a moment. "How did you know?" she asked. "When I placed the mug, you found me so fast. I almost started second-guessing myself. Thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid." "I knew," I said, "because you invented that signal for a reason. You wouldn't have used it unless something was wrong. I trusted that." A silence. Comfortable this time. "Hey, Mom."
"Yeah."
"I'm coming home for Christmas. Just me." I told her that sounded perfect. I told her I'd have the coffee ready. I told her we'd go back to the farmer's market, the same way we used to. I spent almost 3 decades watching people get taken by other people who were extraordinarily good at appearing to be something else. I've seen sharp, educated, perceptive people who knew better and knew it and couldn't stop it, hand over their savings, their retirement, their sense of themselves to someone who smiled at them the right way, at exactly the right moment. The thing I most want people to understand is this. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is not a failure of character. The people who run these schemes are often genuinely gifted at reading people, at manufacturing intimacy, at identifying the precise shape of someone's loneliness and filling it exactly. They study you. They learn your language. For a time, they become exactly what you needed. The warning signs are real, and they are learnable. Watch for artificial urgency, deadlines that create pressure to act before you've had time to think. Watch for investment opportunities introduced through personal relationships, wrapped in the language of love and trust. Watch for emotional intimacy that deepens unusually fast. Watch for documentation that looks right but has details that don't survive verification. And if something feels slightly off, Not dramatically wrong, just slightly, persistently, quietly off. Trust that. The instinct that whispers something isn't right is often right before the mind has caught up to why. But more than any of that, keep the lines open with the people you love. Emily didn't call me and explain what was happening. She couldn't. He was right there. But she found a way to tell me anyway, with nothing more than a coffee mug and 17 years of trust built between us. That's what saved her. Not my 28 years in law enforcement. Not the SEC database, or Rita's task force, or any of the tools I'd spent a career learning to use. A cup placed upside down on a kitchen table.